So we'll also talk now about problem solving, and we'll have a look at some of the models of problem solving from cognitive psychology, have a little bit of a discussion about the brain areas that we know are involved in it, and then have a look at some of the strategies that we would use for people who've had brain injuries. So to start off, think about the models of problem solving. So in terms of cognitive psychology, what you'll find largely is you'll find something that looks almost like a computer flow diagram, where there'll be something that says you encode the problem into working memory, you search your long-term memory for solutions, make an attempt at solving the problem, you compare your situation with a goal state, have you solved it or not, and if not, you go back to one of the previous stages and try again. But in the real world, that kind of a model probably doesn't come close to encapsulating the real complexity of problem solving in day-to-day life. So in terms of the brain areas that are involved, it's going to be the frontal lobe would have a huge importance here, and more specifically the dorsolateral part of the frontal lobe. And this area we know is involved in planning and organisation, and it's involved also in fluency and mental flexibility. And when we talk about fluency in this case, we mean, for example, take the next 10 seconds and try and think of how many boys' names can you think of. So coming up with a number of different examples of boys' names is a type of flexibility. So it's coming up with ideas out of nothing. We're given very little. And also in terms of flexibility, what we mean here, for example, would be take the next 10 seconds and think of a piece of fruit, and then a piece of furniture, and then a piece of fruit, and then a piece of furniture. And in this case, that's flexibility. So you're switching between ideas. So that dorsolateral part of your frontal lobe allows you to come up with ideas and switch between them. And even though we've given very simple examples, those are the foundations of more complex problem solving. You need to be able to come up with ideas, and you need to be able to switch between them and multitask. So in terms of the strategies that we would use working with people in the real world who've had brain injuries and have problems with problem solving, simple is good. So looking back even into the 1970s, Lacan talked about time management skills, and that's an important skill to have. So prioritising tasks, so simply list what I have to do, so list 10 things that you have to do and pick out the 5 most important ones for this week, and you write them down and do them. But also list 10 things that you want to do, something maybe that's more fun, and write those 10 down and you pick the 5 that you're going to do this week. So in that way, even though it seems very simple, for people who have a brain injury, even getting to the point of selecting the 10 things can be tricky, and then prioritising which ones are you going to do. But it's just a simple way of making things more manageable. The other big strategy that we would use organisation-wide is having what's called SMART goals. So they're SMART, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and in some kind of a time frame. So this is the way that the rehabilitation assistants work with people with brain injuries, and it's also something that we would encourage people with brain injuries to do themselves. And for anyone watching this, in terms of your own goals, make sure that they're smart in that way. So one strategy that we've found very useful for people is to simply set out on a flowchart what is the problem, what are the possible solutions. You've got solution 1, 2, 3 and 4 there, and then try and identify what's the best solution out of those 4. Try it to see does it work, and if not, go back and see if a different solution might be more appropriate. And what's useful about this is having those 4 solutions and making sure that the person comes up with 3 or 4 ideas before deciding which is the best one, because this can get around the common problem that people can have of being impulsive, which would also be part of a brain injury. So we would know clients where in doing this they might come up with the first solution and then they'll act on that, but in retrospect that mightn't have been actually the best solution. But helping people come up with 3 or 4 options is often a better way of approaching it, because people can identify then, sometimes at least, which of those options actually is the best one. So also in terms of planning and problem solving, and in the bigger picture of planning your life, one of the most important figures in neuropsychology and neurology in terms of our understanding of brain injury, and particularly frontal lobe brain injury, would be Phineas Gage. who was born in New Hampshire in the United States in 1823 and died in 1860, and famously was involved in a railroad construction accident in 1848, where he had a 3 centimetre by 1 metre metal rod shot through his head in an explosives accident. Now, Phineas survived, but after that accident, where we know that it damaged one, if not both, of his frontal lobes, and there's some disagreement as to which is the case there, but we do know he had a very significant frontal lobe injury. And from accounts at the time, and also these accounts do vary, but essentially Phineas wasn't able to work again, apparently had difficulties managing his life, had significant personality change, and died a young man not long after that in his late 30s. So finally, to think about another aspect, which is the emotional component of decision making. Decision making often occurs in terms of uncertainty about what our choices are going to lead to in terms of outcomes. And there's something called the somatic marker hypothesis that really looks at how decisions are made, particularly in face of uncertain outcomes. And the key idea is that there's marker signals that influence how we process decision making, some of which is conscious, some of which is unconscious. So reasoning is guided by emotion felt when considering our actions' consequences. So, for example, this somatic marker is effectively a bad feeling, or it's your kind of gut level reaction to something. So if you think for a second about something mildly problematic that's going on in your life, so nothing too serious, but something small that's a problem. And now if you think about doing something that makes it worse, do you get a bad feeling? And if you do, that's the somatic marker. So that's guiding your decision. It's that gut level, I don't feel good about this option, part of how we make decisions. And it relates back to Phineas Gage and frontal lobe injuries, in that the thinking is that people who have frontal lobe injuries and bilateral frontal lobe injuries in particular don't get the somatic marker feeling. So when they are making decisions, sometimes they can make poor decisions, and sometimes they'll make the same poor decision again and again. And part of it being explained by they don't get the bad feeling that you would just have had from considering this. So essentially this is something that we try and bear in mind as well in terms of working with the clients that we work with, and maybe it's about getting people to pay attention to, if they do have bad feelings about particular options, to listen to that inner voice. And so that's it in terms of the decision making video.